Hi, everyone. I think I see some people starting to join from the waiting room. Thanks for coming. We'll get started in a few minutes. So for those so for those who are just joining or maybe their audio is just now connecting, we'll get started in just a few minutes. We'll maybe start a little bit late to give some people time. I know this afternoon session can be a tough one after a long day, so we'll get started shortly. Thanks for joining us. So it is 2:30, but I have mentioned a few times now, but for those of you that are just joining us, I think we'll wait just 1 or 2 more minutes. It's sometimes hard to join this afternoon session. So yeah, just a few more minutes and we'll get started. Thanks. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us for this Leveraging Disaster Volunteers session. My name is Sarah Eggert, and I'm a voluntary agency liaison with Homeland Security and Emergency Management Department. And we're happy you're here today. I was mentioning earlier, I know it can be hard to join the afternoon session after a long day, but we're really happy you're here. And thanks for joining us. So just a few reminders, if you wouldn't mind keeping yourself on mute if you're not speaking. And throughout the session today, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll be monitoring that. And we'll have time for question and answer for our panelists later today. And again, this session is being recorded. The materials from this session will be shared following the session today. So we have some really good content and we're lucky to have 3 all-star panelists with us today sharing some of their disaster tested approaches to disaster volunteer management across Iowa. So we have Kayla Paulson of United Way of East Central Iowa and also representing the Lynn Area Partners Active in Disaster. We have Jessica Bullock of Central Iowa RSVP and the IDHRC's current chair, as well as Michael Rojas of Volunteer Iowa. So each panelist will introduce themselves more, starting with our first panelist, Kayla Paulson. And Kayla, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Okay, so I'm closing in on about 10 years with United Way, and I've been part of just as many disasters. Some of them are large, derecho, everyone knows about, and some are very small, localized flash flooding in just a tiny little neighborhood of Cedar Rapids. So now, after derecho, or kind of during derecho, I am starting to oversee the disaster volunteer engagement efforts for United Way of East Central Iowa for all 5 of our counties. So that's what you guys can see on the screen. In addition to that, we do have RSVP, which is Retired and Senior Volunteer Program, and the Volunteer Generations funding from Volunteer Iowa that helps support my position, Amy Jo Keltner from Jones County, who's on the call today, and then also our 3 new positions that we're going to have. So that really makes it so that we've got a good, strong professional team. As I mentioned, we're hiring part-time community resource and volunteer engagement specialists for Benton, Lynn, and Cedar. So we will have staffers in those counties, in addition to the one that we already have in Jones, really making this work part of our everyday. So it's not just doing it when the disaster strikes. We'll drop a link in the chat so that if you know anybody who wants to maybe get into a staffer role like that, it's about 28 hours a week. Thank you very much for dropping that in, and we'll look forward to hopefully having some candidates come through this. As you think about it, disaster work is just like the medical profession. It's a practice. Things are constantly changing. There's no two cases identical, or if you've had one, I please want to learn how you got to do it because it hasn't been that way in our community. So I've had the opportunity to hone my skills over a variety of disasters, different types of response, different communities, different efforts. And I'll tell you, it helps me better respond the next time our community needs support. But none of them have we been able to rinse and repeat. None of them have I been like, ooh, this is deja vu. It's so easy. I feel like I've done it before. It always changes. There's different players, there's different effects, there's different ways of approaching things. So as we look at kind of the next steps, so what are those approaches and challenges? The one thing I can guarantee, you're not going to be able to do it alone. So make sure when you go to your approach, that big disaster response, you have to have a team rally around you. And I'll tell you, I had both personal and professional. My personal squad during derecho helped make sure that as soon as we had power, I got groceries because you couldn't get groceries around here. So I had a friend drive up to Waterloo. I'm in Cedar Rapids. We ended up having them. Actually, they brought lunches to my desk. I was literally in this seat about 16 hours a day. So they made sure that I was nourished. They helped make dinners and give my kids fun things to do when nothing was available to do. They also encouraged me to unplug and go sit around their fire pit. Well, we sat around the fire pit, but we couldn't have a fire. But really just enjoy some time and laugh and have that rejuvenation that I needed because it was heavy work. Disasters aren't easy for any of us that have been in disaster response. You also need a professional team. And again, I'm going to say Amy Jo Keltner on the call from Jones County is one of them. You need to make sure that you've got that team that you can count on, that you know inside and out what they can do, what they're qualified to do, what they like to do. You also need to make sure that you're honest and transparent with them. So immediately after the derecho, when we got asked to step up and help out, honestly, I don't think they needed to ask because we were already like, hey, this is happening, let's do it. But I was very candid with United Way. I said, guys, I can do 16-hour days, 7 days a week for about 2 weeks, and then I'm going to crash. I know this. I've seen it in myself. We need to make sure that we're planning for that. We also knew what each other needed, where we were at. I will say our teammates that were upfront and honest about that made a much bigger relationship growth through this process than those that weren't. So think about that as you're designing your teams. Your team might be affected by the disaster themselves, or they might not be able to handle the pressure of it because it's a high stakes game. It feels very stressful. So you need to make sure you've got multiple people trained, have that cross training, also divide and conquer. You can't do it all. Anyone who knows me, I saw some familiar names. You can even call me out in the chat box, but I might be a bit of a control freak. My husband says I don't have to be in control if I know it's under control. So connect with your group regularly. Divide up the workload so that individuals have the authority and autonomy to make things happen. Again, I'm a bit of a control freak, but if I work with my team and I build that trust, then I know things are under control. So think about who are some of the best volunteer engagement professionals already in your community. Who are the leaders of communities of faith? What agencies already have great volunteer practices in place? And bring them to the table. Relationship building. Starting today, don't wait, put it on your calendar. I know we have 2 more great days of conference coming up, but I challenge you guys for the next 6 months. So in December, shoot me an email and tell me you did it. Take every disaster that you hear of on a national, worldwide stage and ask yourself, what would help your community if that disaster happened here? Now, I know sometimes it's not going to be apples for apples, but think through it. Make sure to reach out to individuals that would be a great asset as you're looking at this. Make sure to have those companies that could be able to help in the immediate response. I'm not going to name drop any companies, but in the picture, you see one. They said, we've got equipment. We can't get supplies here. We can't do a lot of things, but we can help. What can we do? So making sure you're reaching out and connecting with them right away. You also want to look at who could be in that inner circle. I'll say we've leveraged construction, trades, even beer distributors. They were not distributing beer. We did do a press release that they were food boxes during COVID. People weren't getting Bud Light brought to their homes because we wanted to make sure to quickly clarify that. But you need some volunteers to help internally with that administration and operations and bring them in with your emergency volunteer center or your volunteer reception center, whichever model you go with. But the majority of your needs is going to be finding leads to maximize efforts and effectiveness. So that might be a chainsaw lead, that might be some of those others. So just make sure you're really getting a diverse and multi-talented group. I threw up here a couple of the ones that we've already tapped into over the last couple of years. No matter what, the most important thing, and I loved hearing it from probably 3 or 4 other people already today, is creating those relationships during sunshine days. When there's rainbow and sunshine, we want to create relationships. We want to really genuinely connect with these and design a mutually beneficial partnership. When you can align talents, passions, and missions, it's amazing what we can achieve. So really do take a look at this. It's honestly just a starter. There's a bunch more out there that I didn't fill the whole slide with. So really think about that and ask who might be able to help and how might they be able to help. Because if you have a targeted ask, you're much more likely to get a yes. Now, I might sound, because I had somebody tell me I was really positive and inspirational in this. But guess what? We've failed, and we've failed a lot. I don't want to say up to the Einstein level. We haven't done, 3,000 ways that you don't make a light bulb. But I really want you to think about it's not failure if you learn from it. So let's fail forward. And let's fail forward together because we're all in Iowa. We're all doing volunteer engagement in disasters. So let's work together. Let's build out that resource. So 3 new staffers that we're hiring, we're going to have them equipped and ready to do a disaster within 90 days. Because guess what? We've been burned. We didn't help empower a staff member to run a disaster. We did not hold them accountable. We didn't build out that piece. So when the derecho hit, they weren't able to respond in the best way possible. We also know relationships take effort. And we're making sure to really build genuine relationships with those who will be working with us when the stakes get high. Because think about when you're under a lot of stress and you're maybe literally walking from your desk 6 feet to your bed, crashing for 6 hours and waking back up and walking back. You might not be as socially appropriate as always. You might be a little bit more snippy. I probably was. Amy might out me in the chat. But really think about if you've got a good relationship with people, they know your norm. They know that this is the situation. This isn't you. They know that you're dealing with 5 other things and the extra workload. So really make sure as people change, as roles change, that you get it on your calendar to dedicate time. Again, I'm going back to start now, 6 months from now, email me and say you did it. But really build that time in, put it on your calendar, connect, go out to coffee, maybe have iced teas on the patio, whatever that might look like. Also, we kicked off each day with an emergency volunteer center team huddle. So that's my inner circle, those people that are really engaged with us throughout the process. We did a check-in with the VOADs, and I know that words came up a couple times, but it's the voluntary organizations active during disaster. Some of those were national teams that were here locally. Others were locals, church groups, communities of faith, that kind of thing. And then we took all the questions that came either from our internal team, the ones that were out in the field doing the work, and brought them back to the COAD, that community organization active in disaster. So last piece I'm going to leave with you guys is looking to see how we can, better leverage our statewide network. So I will tell you, as I have dove maybe 2 feet in or jumped into the deep end with IDHRC, I have been thrilled with how much I have learned from others, how I've been able to even polish other people's wheels instead of recreating it myself. So again, look at how we can leverage each other, because guess what? We didn't have power and internet. And if I would have worked with my peers ahead of time and they would have known our standard protocols, they could have maybe activated things on our Get Connected platform or done some things to at least get the word out there of, yes, we will need volunteers when we're ready. Here's how you can get plugged in. So hope you guys enjoy the next couple panelists, and we'll talk to you soon in Q&A.
Thank you, Kayla, so much. And I've really enjoyed working with Kayla over the past couple of months, learning more about how, the strategy in that area of Iowa is for engaging disaster volunteers. So looking forward to learning more from you, Kayla, in the coming months as well. So that's one approach to engaging and leveraging disaster volunteers. We're going to shift over to Story County, to Jessica Bullock, who will share their approach to engaging volunteers. Over to you, Jessica.
All right, thank you. So my name is Jessica Bullock and I'm with Central Iowa RSVP. And kind of like Kayla, I think really essentially the positions that she's now trying to fill in her area are essentially what I'm doing in Story County. So I just kind of want to talk about what we do in Story County, some of the partnerships that we have and how that allows us to engage volunteers both in and out of disasters. We have typically with RSVP, like Kayla said, it's retired and senior volunteer program. So more often than not, we engage volunteers who are 55 and older. However, with our disaster program in Story County, it's more of an internal operation. So I get to engage volunteers throughout the community, which is really great for us because we have Iowa State right in town in Ames, and it gives us an opportunity to engage student groups and younger folks in the communities to participate in disaster trainings year round. We have several partnerships that we focus on and have volunteers trained for. That way, when a disaster of any kind happens, we are ready to step forward and offer our services. So we work mostly with Story County Emergency Management. We also work with Story County Public Health, and we work with Story County Sheriff's Office. And in the last couple of years, we've been able to activate with emergency management and public health. So I just kind of want to go through each of those organizations and kind of explain how we engage volunteers. So the first partnership is with Story County Emergency Management. This partnership began back in 2006 around flooding, when they were looking to have volunteers come and do sandbagging and distribute water. And since then, we have worked to run the Volunteer Reception Center anytime there is any kind of event in Story County. What's really great about the Volunteer Reception Center and how we work with emergency management is it's a really tight partnership. So we train volunteers usually about once a year to run a VRC. So we'll have, we'll kind of start from the bottom where we just tell the volunteers that we're having an exercise, they need to report. And then we have community volunteers come through and we process them just to make sure all the volunteers are aware of how the Volunteer Reception Center works. After the tornado in, after the tornado in Marshalltown, we realized that we have, so sorry, guys. We realized that with the tornado in Marshalltown that lots of volunteers converged, and it was really difficult to figure out where they needed to go and where help was needed. So we worked with emergency management in Story County for about a year from 2018 to 2019 to come up with some sort of online registration system so that hopefully we could have a way to pre-register those spontaneous volunteers and those volunteer groups that were going to come into the county just to kind of get ahead of the game. So what happened with Duratio is we had our online registration system up and running. So it was really great. Even though power went out for a lot of the area, we were in contact with media outlets. Our emergency managers were able to put information out on websites, and it instructed volunteers in the community, if they wanted to help, that they could go online and register, and we would contact them, create teams for them, and then have them come to the VRC and check in with us. And it would just really streamline the operation. And what we were able to do is have 200 volunteers that were pre-registered, which normally would have been 200 spontaneous volunteers. So they were able to register ahead of time, and we were able to get them into the community in a very organized and streamlined manner. And so that was a really positive experience with us through that derecho, which wouldn't have happened if we didn't have such a great relationship and partnership with our emergency management. We also partner with Story County Public Health. And typically we have a drill once a year with them where we come up with some sort of a medical crisis. And we have volunteers come and we work through what a pod, points of distribution would look like. And that partnership really began back in 2009, right when H1N1 started. They utilized us for volunteers to help with those clinics to get the flu shots out to people. And that partnership has just continued over the last several years. Obviously, COVID was one that was not something that we were able to practice because no one really saw that coming. So, but we were able to help them with COVID vaccine clinics, which was really exciting. I apologize, my dog is not feeling well. I'm so sorry. This timing is just so horrible.
It's totally fine, Jessica. We've all been there. We've all been there. Just keep going. We're gonna ignore the heaving sound. It's all good.
Terrible timing. So with COVID, we were activated by public health. They asked us to help staff their vaccine clinics, which is a great way to get volunteers because they know that in order to help with the clinics, they themselves have to be vaccinated. So our volunteers were obviously really excited to participate, knowing that they kind of became essential workers themselves. So we had about 50 volunteers who stepped forward and we're ready to help with that partnership. And since December, they've put in over 2,000 hours helping to staff the COVID clinics, both at the public health site and at about a dozen outreach clinics that they've done in the community to help make sure manufacturers and educators in the more rural areas were taken care of as well. And that's been really great for us. And really, we just we leaned on them to just let us know what they needed. And then we communicated with our volunteers and they were able to step up and be willing to go out into the communities despite the pandemic and help. Our other partnership that we have is with the Story County Sheriff's Office. That is probably one of the most favorite partnerships that we have. Our volunteers love this one. These volunteers work with a tip hotline and a staging area. So anytime there is a missing persons incident in Story County, we have volunteers who are trained to run the tip hotline. So the Sheriff's Department will put out the phone number for anyone who has tips on the missing person. And our volunteers get to answer the phones and have those conversations with community members who are calling in to give tips. And it's a really great way for the volunteers to feel like they're making a difference. You can see in this picture, they've got the phones out, and what they do during the training is they practice calling each other and role playing to make sure that in any kind of a scenario that they know when to notify the Sheriff's Department, staff person, or if they can just take notes and then report that back later. We also help with the staging area to help with downstairs. to help with volunteers who show up for missing persons as well. We will process them, take note of their driver's license, and then the volunteers are able to go with the sheriff's department members to do searches for missing people. So that's one that's really great. We try and train that one to 2 times a year, and it's a really popular one. The next slide just kind of talks about our activation structure. With all of these partnerships we have, we as RSVP never activate ourselves. We never step forward and say, hey, this looks like it's going on in the community and we're here to help. It's very much the agency that we partner with is just in charge of notifying us when they're ready for us. I believe with derecho, even though emergency management, obviously we knew right away that there would be a need for a VRC. But we just waited. We notified our volunteers and said, be ready. At some point, we're going to do this. We're just not sure when. And so we waited for emergency management to contact us. And that's when I think it was it might have been 8 or so days after derecho that we had volunteers ready to go out into the community with the VRC. So it's always that agency, it's always that partner agency that activates us and they give us detailed information on the needs that they have, so we know exactly what we're doing, exactly what our volunteers are expected to do.
Brian stuck his middle finger at Dutch.
And then once our volunteers are activated, they contact me and then I reach out to our volunteers. We utilize a couple ways to do this. We have the Iowa, they just changed it. It used to be WINS. I believe it's called RAVE. So we can use that mass notification system. We also just go through easy stuff like utilizing Google spreadsheets or Sign Up Genius or mass texting or emailing. And our volunteers are really receptive to that kind of communication. Then when it comes to deactivating, that again comes from that partnering agency. They notify us when they feel the need has been met. Obviously, that's a lot of communication with us as well, just to kind of see where things are at, what our volunteers are experiencing, and if we feel like we've kind of maxed out our capacity. And then I work with them on that and then reach out to volunteers to demobilize them. So that's kind of what we do in Story County. Like I said, a lot of our volunteers are internal that we keep engaged throughout the year doing trainings and drills, but it also allows us opportunities to bring in the whole community by having our Google spreadsheet where they can go online and register ahead of a disaster has really made a huge difference in our community, so that we have more safety. We really have people who are notifying us when they're ready to volunteer at a time when we're ready to accept them.
Thank you so much, Jessica. You know, a few years ago, if anybody remembers that clip of the BBC when a man was presenting to the BBC and his child came in and, you know, he was so mortified, but that's kind of our reality now. So Jessica, don't worry about it at all. And you did a fantastic job. So thanks so much for sharing. You're really a hero to have the dog and the kids. So thanks very much. So let's get over to you, Michael. Over to you.
Perfect. I just want to take a moment to agree that was an absolute masterclass on how to remain calm in a difficult situation. So just kudos to you, Jessica. I don't know if I could juggle all of that at the same time. I'm selfishly in an empty office with empty chairs around me. So if my presentation is any worse, that's just reflective poorly on me. But how's it going, everybody? My name is Michael Rojas. I'm going to be talking about AmeriCorps during national service and during times of disaster. I am with Volunteer Iowa. I am the disaster programs officer. If I am taking too long, I usually love to talk about this stuff. Someone please unmute, play some Oscar music, really sweep me along. I do get sidetracked just because I love this. This is my passion. And I end up diverging on a couple topics. So So I just wanted to go ahead and start out, and not because I have narcissistic tendencies and have to talk about my portfolio here, but I really just wanted to highlight just AmeriCorps and give it the respect that it deserves in terms of being a portal for professional development and career opportunities. So I just wanted to take a little bit and talk about where I was. So I'm not originally from Iowa, so I came to Iowa to serve with one of our 8 arts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides, but Habitat for Humanity of Iowa's mobile response team as an AmeriCorps member. And through that time, I served in the Marshalltown tornado recovery efforts. And then we were also deployed during the 2019 Southwest Iowa floods in response, mucking and gutting down in Hamburg, Fremont Mills County. And then I thankfully, very fortunately, was hired on as the county coordinator. And during that time, spent some time responding, as everybody, to the COVID-19 pandemic. We battled food insecurity at the food banks, and then ultimately another disaster within that disaster, the 2020 derecho, of which I, again, was fortunately enough to have been chosen to be the incident commander for a FEMA mission assignment, and had a total of 5 AmeriCorps disaster response teams deployed under me. And that inevitably led me to take a position here at Volunteer Iowa, which is the state service commission for volunteer service, as a disaster programs officer. And I'll talk a little bit about that, and just typically the 4 main areas that the commission focuses on in disaster services is national service, which is our AmeriCorps engagement, and we'll talk about our AmeriCorps disaster response teams, our statewide unaffiliated volunteer management, our disaster volunteer management trainings, and our volunteer solutions, which goes into like web-based volunteer search portals and disaster registration system, which in this case is our Get Connected system, in which you could pre-register for volunteers and then get notified, pre-register for disaster and they get notified if there is an opportunity that pops up, and if there's ever a need for disaster volunteers, and then we could take that back and record those hours. So in general, just us as Volunteer Iowa, we provide training, technical assistance, web-based data resources and capacity building, partnership development before, during, and after disaster events. We're also the main lead in the state for disaster response as it comes to volunteer and donations management. And we do that in partnership with Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management Department, which is our state agency that handles our disaster events in the state. And I work very closely with Sarah Eggert and Lori Williams, who are state VALs. And they talked a little bit about that before. And we also partner with the governor's office because we are a state agency as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides. So what are AmeriCorps disaster response teams? What are 8 arts? So there are current AmeriCorps programs that have a focus on disaster services and serve as nationally deployable resources. So it's basically opportunities for programs to expand their service past their typical program outlines. So the DSU, which is the Disaster Services Unit, at AmeriCorps, the agency, now formerly, the artist formerly known as CNCS, the Corporation for National Service, coordinates AmeriCorps engagement for disaster preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. So the DSU oversees and implements the 8 art program, essentially. And all 8 arts follow a standard established protocol in the field when deployed by the DSU, and are under the management of the AmeriCorps Incident Command System. So it just keeps things tight, relegated, and just having everybody on the same page is so essential when we go out into a response. So they're typically recognized in emergency management, in the emergency management community, as leaders in volunteer management. And they could also provide a plethora of skills that are not typical to some programs, like volunteer management, donations management, mucking and gutting, post floods, debris management, call center and data management. So like capacity building, mass care, long-term recovery development. And just as an example, after the Joplin storm, In Missouri, more than 425 AmeriCorps members were deployed to the area to help the community rebuild, assisting more than 3,000 households, and saved an astronomical whopping $17.7 million just through recording volunteer hours and just having everything documented and streamlined. So it just gives you a little bit of a taste of what AmeriCorps can do when properly leveraged and positioned in times of disaster. And that included, volunteer management and just general capacity building. So although ADARTs are nationally deployable resources, we have our own Iowa ADARTs here. So as a state service commission, we are technically an ADART, and we have many programs under us. So the Habitat for Humanity of Iowa Mobile Response Team is one of our ADARTs, and the Burr Oak Land Trust, as well as the, oh my gosh, my roommate is part of this. The Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Iowa. I can't believe I blanked on that for a second. So we have our own here, so we're able to, and we have that capacity to be able to respond locally to events that aren't to the level of where there needs to be a federally declared presidential disaster declaration. If there's something smaller in our community, we have the ability to just be available at a moment's notice, a hop, skip, and away with our tools and our expertise. And we never self-deploy, and I won't go too much into how we deploy just for the sake of time, but through AmeriCorps, we are part of the National Response Framework. So through the DSU, it essentially guides how we respond to all disasters and emergencies, and it's scalable, flexible, and adaptable based on the situation. But mostly we end up getting deployed under FEMA mission assignments. So if in a federally declared disaster, the DSU will work with state and federal partners to identify unmet needs, and then they bring that back in developing a mission assignment. They develop a time frame for a response, and then we essentially get deployed through that. And our programs have long since been the first to respond and the last to leave. So here are just a few examples of some national responses that Iowa ADARTs have been a part of. And I'll just say that all the photos that you're seeing are photos that we've taken through our responses. So these are ours, these are our members. Here we have our members in the Northeast Iowa Food Bank battling food insecurity, and I'll talk a little more about that in another slide. But we were part of the 2008 Iowa floods, that historic instance, the 2012 Hurricane Sandy event. And very funny, a note from another one of our program officers here, Chad Driscoll, talking about driving a minivan through NYC and just saying like how much of a difficult time that was just in the starting instance of it. But I left that in here just to provide some levity, but also our teams can go anywhere and adapt to any situation. It's something that I think we take a lot of pride in, and something that, we have a lot of experience in. As you can see here, we even went to the Yukon River flooding in Alaska. We sent some staffers to the South Carolina floods, the 2016 Missouri floods, and then the historic year in 2017 for hurricanes in the US Virgin Islands. So we sent that. So a big proponent of ADARTs is just being flexible and rolling with the punches. And I think this is just evident in our list. And I'm going to now talk a little more about the most recent disasters that we are a part of. So I'm not going to bore you guys with going into literally every quantifiable that we have listed here, but just take some time and then potentially we'll send this out after and you could look at these numbers. But I just wanted to give everybody an idea of the amount of work that we're able to do within the time that we're allotted to us as ADARTs. I was very fortunate enough to have been a part of this response. So I took a couple of these pictures of this historic flooding that affected Iowa as well. So we had 8 ADART programs deployed over 4 months of the mission assignment lifetime. So this was a nationally national deployment that we were a part of as well. And we also supported with, as Volunteer Iowa, not myself because I was an AmeriCorps member at that time, but Volunteer Iowa supported coordinating efforts along with AmeriCorps, the agency. So, you know, this is just something that shows you of our vast range of what we're able to do in those quantifiables. And this was my first disaster, if we're not counting the Marshalltown recovery. And it was honestly one of the best instances of my life, being in that Tyvek suit in 113-degree heat, ripping homes to the studs, ripping out moldy drywall. You know, I think that the biggest thing that when it comes to 8 Arts is that there's no lack of passion, there's no lack of heart. We go into these areas that have been utterly destroyed, and we really bring hope where there has been hopelessness and despair. And the encounters that I've had, especially during the floods, it's always of just pure relief and elation, and something that I like to do, which is just get sweaty and swing a sledgehammer. But just from that aspect, scaling that up, our impact really sends ripples throughout a community, especially Percival. One of the residents dubbed us their angels at some point, because there was just, you know, once the bigger national teams leave, there's just this huge void, and it really affects the individuals of the community, and we're able to go in there and provide some services. So following that, the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, maybe you guys have heard of it. We also had some response and some hand in this. So why we also partner with Homeland Security, we also partner with the governor's office, since we are a state agency. So we have that connection, and the governor actually has the ability to request AmeriCorps to respond to needs in the state. It doesn't happen often, but it happened last year, and allows essentially programs to release their members from the normal term of activities to do what is needed to support in our efforts. And it isn't always the first go-to, but depending on the magnitude of the event and the resources available, it's definitely an option. And because of the unprecedented time, that's exactly what happened last year. So just the quantifiables that you see here in this slide are specifically from a state mission assignment. So it wasn't a nationally deployed mission assignment. It was just here in the state of Iowa. So we had the Conservation Corps of Minnesota, Iowa, and the Habitat for Humanity of Iowa Mobile Response Team. And again, I was fortunate enough to be a part of this, and it was very humbling experience to see. But yeah, I'll continue through it. But we were part of the Feeding Iowa's task force, and it was great. So again, the derecho, another unprecedented event, and that word should probably be stricken from the dictionary at this point because I'm just sick of hearing it. But you could see the quantifiables here, and this is something that I was, again, fortunate enough to be the incident commander of. During the course of around 30 days, we had 60 work assignments completed in the Cedar Rapids area, but we touched 11 counties that were declared. And at one point we called we called every single person in crisis cleanup to gauge their need and what needed to be done. And then even on a smaller scale, the mobile response team and myself worked in Marshalltown and coordinated efforts with national teams. And we gave situational awareness call outs on the IDHRC weekly calls at that point. So just from a grander scheme of things, we have our hand in a lot, and we try to do as much as we can. And just for the last 2 responses, I thought it was incredibly important to highlight that we had 0 cases of COVID throughout that entire time with all of our members. So we took health and safety incredibly important, and we made it a priority. So that's all I got for you guys.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks so much. And a lot of you on the call are probably the same way, but I just want to emphasize how amazing these three people are. Michael, who gets excited about using a chainsaw and helping out in that way. Kayla, who's willing to put in 16-hour days week after week during a disaster. Jessica, who's obviously calm and composed when things are not going as planned. So these are just three people, and I know a lot of you are the same way, that are available to help Iowans and engage volunteers after a disaster. So I think we're very lucky to be learning from all of you. So, it's the end of the day. We're kind of ending our time here, but wanted to give an opportunity for questions. I did see just one question in the chat, but if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself as well. So I think, Glenn, you had asked a question about VRC training, so VRC Volunteer Reception Center, and if there's any staff that would be available for the Volunteer Reception Center. So first, maybe Kayla, if you don't mind briefly mentioning that, and then I'll give the opportunity to you, Jessica, as well to respond.
Yes, so we have done VRC training locally for Lynn County, Jones County. I've also done it with some other volunteer centers because it's nice to cross-train in different communities. And then we do have some United Way staff that help manage the Volunteer Reception Center. We also leverage our partners. So the city of Cedar Rapids has an amazing volunteer engagement professional with the library. The library during derecho was not open due to COVID. So they were able to help out during that. With flood threading, they've been able to step in. So we also leverage staff from other agencies to support. If you're looking for a VRC training, I might say Michael is a great option. And yes, others of us might be more than willing to join in, but there's a good FEMA training that's a good core to start with.
Okay, so Glenn clarified too. He was the one that asked the question. So I think he was asking that question also when you were speaking, Jessica. So if you did VRC training as well as staff the VRC as RSVP did in the past, but Kayla, thank you also for that input. So yeah, over to you, Jessica. Thanks for clarifying, Glenn.
Yeah, so our volunteers are trained to run the VRC. So they staff it while it's open, and we have I have this core group. I call them my core group of disaster volunteers, who are the ones who are like really go-getters, and they are trained to kind of supervise the VRC as well. So I don't feel like I have to be there at all times, but all of our volunteers are capable of running the VRC, no matter the scale that we run it at. One of the things we learned during derecho, when you have all 15 communities in your county affected, that it's kind of difficult to have one VRC in one spot. And so one of the things that we've looked back at and recognized is that, knock on wood, if something like this happens again, what we could do different is, with all of the volunteers that we have that are trained to staff the VRC, is we could have a VRC site really in each community where volunteers are needed, to again streamline the work that needs to get done in the communities. But yeah, our VRCs are staffed by our volunteers, and we do those trainings once a year with them.
Great, thank you, Jessica, for that follow-up. I wanted to mention that actually today on this call, we have two voluntary agency liaisons from surrounding states, from Nebraska, Chris Schroeder, and then from Minnesota, Jeannie Rasmussen. So Jeannie asked a really excellent question that I'm going to pose to the panelists. She asked, could you each provide at least one idea of how to energize current volunteers who might be experiencing burnout or fatigue, from these sustained disasters from the past 18 months. So over to you if you have any ideas for our friends in Minnesota.
I have mine, but I'll defer to the others before. So.
Well, you spoke first, Michael. I'm so sorry. That means you have to go.
I would say that whenever, in terms of just keeping volunteers energized, and they're out there, they want to support the community, they want to help. I think having someone who's identified as kind of that cheerleader during the work is so essential and crucial. I always put that upon myself. We just did a cleanup day the other week, and just touching base with every single volunteer, how you're doing, really hitting home why you're doing what you're doing. Just having someone who's like a golden retriever, if you want to put it in that sense, I think that is so essential. They love it. They always will just keep their eye on the prize, and then try to manage the fatigue as well if you're taking breaks. But I think just having someone who's just that designated person to be that way, also providing lunch or some type of meal during, you'll have some happy campers. So those, I guess, would be my 2 ways.
That's really great. I like that. I'm going to jump in while it's quiet in the background for a change. So I will say with our disaster programming, part of the way we have it set up is to essentially kind of avoid the burnout. So like I mentioned, we have volunteers that we use for the sheriff's office, for emergency management, and for public health. So when we have new volunteers come on board, we kind of go over each of those 3 partnerships with them and let them pick which volunteer opportunity kind of speaks to their soul the most. And so if I know that I've got a volunteer who isn't really interested in the VRC, but really wants to help with the medical things, we kind of keep them in their happy boxes. So I know exactly which volunteers to call on for each event. So granted, there is some carryover. We did have a lot of volunteers who did the VRC and then went into the medical with the pods. Now that's kind of their choice, but we also, I do keep in contact with the volunteers obviously a lot while they're volunteering, especially for something that went on as long as COVID has with our clinics. And just always encouraging them to take a week off or a couple days off. Our partnerships are really great. I know that, like Michael said, our public health has provided lunch multiple times to our volunteers and just kind of give them that really positive environment where they are constantly getting reminded what a huge difference they're making at the time. And we always try and do recognition events to kind of celebrate the end and to hope for a break before anything new happens. But I think just recognizing the skills of your volunteers to make sure that they're placed in positions where they feel energized and engaged rather than feeling overwhelmed and burnt out has made a huge difference for us.
So I will say you guys had great ideas and love all of them. I even added a couple to my list. Definitely with the meals. I've got what I call Mama Ginger's Catering, also known as my own personal mom. But I know my volunteers. So I know some of them having a hot delivered dinner to them and their family is what they need, that unplugged time to just regenerate with their family. I know others, really want to be completely unplugged for 2 days. So we try and look at, I'll be very honest, prior to Duratio, we had somebody be the lead for 2 to 3 days, and then they had at least 1 day off. And we tried to do that kind of cycle. So that's a lot of times what we build in is trying to have it so that you're probably 3 days on, because those are 3 very long days usually, and then at least a day or 2 off, and trying to find out what's good for them. So some of my volunteers are extroverts, and getting to interact with 10,000 people is a great way for them to even stay energized, and it's not going to give burnout. Where my introverts doing data entry in their own quiet personal space is what's going to help keep them energized. So it's a combination of recognition and gifts and, their love language that works for them. There's a great volunteer love language quiz, and also knowing their internal workings enough to really balance what they're doing with what's going to help them be in their best state.
Love those ideas, guys. And sounds like you're really taking care of your volunteers. Hopefully, Jeannie, that's spurred some ideas for you as well. Just wanted to open it up. Are there any last questions for this amazing group of panelists before we end for today? I'll give it just a moment to see if anybody's typing anything in the chat box, but if not, are there any last comments from you, the panelists, that you wanted to share with the group? So I think the 35-ish of you who are on the call won't be opposed to us ending a little bit early. Thanks to everybody for making it today. Really appreciate that. We have our session tomorrow at 8:30, our opening session. And speaking of self-care, we do have those self-care moments that PDA is leading us through. So that's a chance for us to recharge and just stop and reminisce and focus and all of that. So I hope you can join us tomorrow at 8:30. And I'm going to leave here. Kayla reminded me that we have one more slide with the contact information of these wonderful people. So they're great resources and very timely in responding. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them, as well as me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. So thanks everybody for joining, not only at our session, but today as well. So thank you everyone. And thanks panelists.